Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to dive into one of the most critical periods in modern history. How does a democracy actually fail?
Right.
Specifically, we're looking at that really short, terrifying period between 1929 and 1934 that let Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party grab total, absolute control in Germany.
And this wasn't some slow, gradual slide. It was a rapid collapse. And our mission today is to really understand that cocktail of ingredients.
The crisis, the tactics.
Exactly. The economic crisis, the political weakness, and the ruthless tactics that turned a young republic into a totalitarian state. We need to define exactly what went wrong.
And the absolute foundation for this entire story is just desperation. You have to start in
The
1929.
Great Depression.
Yeah, the global economic catastrophe.
Mm.
This thing hits Germany like a tidal wave, mostly because their economy was already so fragile.
Precisely. Germany was still trying to rebuild after World War I, and their economy was incredibly sensitive to global markets. So when the Depression hit, factories closed, markets crashed.
And for millions of ordinary people, that meant losing your job.
We're talking about 6 million people. That's a third of the entire working population. Suddenly no job.
And this wasn't just a tough recession. This was existential. People couldn't afford food. They couldn't keep their homes. So when the government can no longer guarantee your basic survival, that fear turns into anger. And all that anger is pointed right at the system.
They felt the democratic government, the Weimar Republic, had totally and completely failed them.
And this vacuum, this huge vacuum of despair, is exactly where the Nazi Party steps in.
They saw all this misery not as a tragedy, but as a political opportunity.
Right. While all the other parties are arguing about budgets, the Nazis are campaigning on raw emotion and these really simple, radical promises.
Promises that sounded exactly like what a starving, unemployed person needed to hear.
Jobs and bread.
Jobs and bread. They offered an end to the chaos. Stability, strength, all packaged in slogans that were super easy to remember.
But that desperation alone wasn't the only ingredient, was it?
Not at all. That economic despair landed right on top of this already boiling pot of national humiliation that had been simmering for over a decade.
We have to talk about the Treaty of Versailles.
You have to. It's the deep psychological wound left over from World War I.
So this treaty was basically the penalty Germany had to pay for losing the war, and the consequences were just catastrophic,
Yeah.
economically and emotionally.
Absolutely. The terms were designed to be punitive. Germany was forced to accept full, sole blame for starting the entire war.
Which fed into this powerful narrative that they'd been betrayed, right? The whole stabbed in the back myth.
Exactly. And beyond that humiliation, there was the financial burden, these crippling payments reparations to the Allied nations that just drained the country's resources.
Plus, they had their military shrunk down to almost nothing.
Right, and they were forced to give up huge areas of valuable territory. It really felt like the entire nation had been stripped of its pride and its power.
So when Hitler gets up in front of these huge crowds, he isn't talking about complex economic policy. He's focusing all of his energy on tearing up that unfair treaty, throwing off the shackles, and making Germany a powerful, respected nation again.
And that message of national revival was incredibly powerful, especially for young people, for former soldiers. When you fuse that feeling with the reality of starving in 1932, well, you create an explosive political force.
The emotional fuel was there, they just needed a delivery system.
And that delivery system was the Nazi playbook. It was a masterclass in modern campaigning and ruthless street tactics.
The first piece of that, and maybe the most important, was their total mastery of propaganda, which was managed by Joseph Goebbels.
They really understood that in this new age of mass media, repetition and emotion were way more powerful than nuance and facts.
They used every modern tool they could get their hands on, not just posters everywhere, but radio broadcasts, newsreels, and cinemas.
And the key was the simplicity of the message. They distilled these really complex problems down into catchy us versus them slogans that just stuck in your head.
And Hitler was the absolute center of it all. He wasn't just a speaker, he was a performer.
Oh, completely. We know he meticulously practiced his gestures, his body language, the exact tone of his voice, all to project this image of incredible strength.
The rallies themselves were designed to be these overwhelming sensory experiences.
To create a sense of unity and power.
You've got massive crowds, endless flags, marching music. You weren't just going to a political meeting. You felt like you were joining a movement that was surging forward.
And they even used technology to push this idea of being dynamic and modern. Hitler famously traveled by airplane.
Something no other political leader was doing at the time.
Right. It allowed him to campaign in dozens of cities in a very short time. He seemed tireless, omnipresent.
But the campaign wasn't just about winning votes with excitement. It was also about crushing dissent with fear.
And that's where the Sturmabteilung comes in, the SA.
The brown shirts, the Nazi Party's paramilitary wing.
These were the force on the streets. And they operated completely outside the law. Their job, nominally, was to protect Nazi meetings, but their real purpose was intimidation and violence.
So they would actively and often violently disrupt the gatherings of their political opponents.
Communists, social democrats, anyone who stood against them. This led to brutal street battles, which created this intense chaos in every major German city.
Which is so strange because while that violence was terrifying, some people actually saw it differently.
Yeah, it's a very strange calculation, yeah.
Yeah.
They saw the democratic government struggling to keep order, but the SA, even though they were violent, looked disciplined. They looked organized.
So some people started to think that the Nazis were the only ones strong enough to restore order, even if it was through force.
The message was, we are strong, and the reality on the street was, we are the only ones fighting, and everyone else is weak.
And this whole cycle of engineered chaos was happening against the backdrop of an incredibly fragile government, the Weimar Republic.
And this structural weakness is so crucial. The system itself was fundamentally unstable. The way it was designed encouraged dozens of political parties.
Meaning no single party could ever get a clear majority.
Which leads to political gridlock. You have to form these coalition governments, but these different parties could never agree on anything, especially how to fix the economic crisis.
So these weak governments would just collapse, right? Sometimes after only a few months.
Yeah, and the public just got completely exhausted and cynical. You have constant elections, constant infighting, and zero solutions. People lost faith in democracy itself.
They just wanted stability. Didn't matter who provided it. And this is where the system starts to undermine itself because the Constitution had a kind of authoritarian escape hatch built in.
That's right. It allowed the president, Paul von Hindenburg, to use emergency powers to rule by decree and just bypass parliament entirely.
And he started doing that more and more.
He did, which got the public used to the idea of a single strong leader making decisions instead of, messy democratic debate.
That opened the door wide for the Nazis to just explode electorally. They perfectly exploited all that instability.
Between 1928 and 1932, their share of the vote just skyrocketed.
And by the election in July 1932, the Nazi Party was the largest single party in the Reichstag, the German parliament.
They didn't have an overall majority, but they were too big, too powerful to ignore anymore.
And it's so important to remember how broad their support was. It wasn't just one group of people.
No, it was young people, farmers who were deep in debt, middle-class shopkeepers who were terrified of communism.
And even powerful, wealthy businessmen who saw Hitler as a way to restore order and protect their assets.
So this put the aging President Hindenburg in an impossible position. He desperately needed a stable government, and Hitler controlled the biggest voting bloc.
Which brings us to the final fatal political step. The Chancellor appointment. January 30th, 1933. Hindenburg officially appoints Hitler as Chancellor.
And he didn't do this because he admired Hitler. It was a political calculation, a terrible gamble made by conservative politicians like Franz von Papen.
They thought they could use Hitler's popularity to stabilize the country, but they were absolutely convinced they could keep him under control.
Yeah, they thought they were the chess masters. Hitler was one of only 3 Nazis in the new cabinet. They figured he was surrounded, that they could rein him in.
And it was arguably the greatest political miscalculation of the entire 20th century.
They fatally underestimated his ruthlessness. They saw him as a temporary problem, not a permanent threat to the whole system.
And the democratic clock started ticking down immediately.
He moved with blistering speed. Just weeks after taking office, they get the catalyst they needed.
The Reichstag fire.
The parliament building in Berlin is destroyed in this massive fire. A Dutch communist is found at the scene.
And he is immediately blamed.
Instantly. They don't wait for an investigation. They claim the fire is the start of a violent communist revolution that's about to overthrow the government.
They created this urgent sense of a national crisis that only they could handle.
And because of that manufactured fear, Hitler convinces President Hindenburg to sign the Decree for the Protection of People and State, the Emergency Decree.
And this decree, this was the first real dagger into the heart of German democracy.
It suspended nearly every single civil right from the Constitution. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and most critically, habeas corpus.
Meaning the police could now arrest political opponents and hold them forever without a trial.
Yes. It created this immediate atmosphere of intense fear. They shut down opposition newspapers and swept up thousands of communists and social democrats right before the next critical election,
The playing field was now legally completely tilted in their favor.
which set the stage for the true power grab in late March 1933, the passage of the Enabling Act.
Okay, so if the emergency decree suspended rights, the Enabling Act just destroyed the entire structure of democracy.
It did. The Enabling Act literally transferred all lawmaking power from the parliament, the Reichstag, to the chancellor, to Hitler and his cabinet for 4 years,
He could now make laws that even violated the Constitution.
without anyone's approval. It turned him from a prime minister into a legal dictator, easily overnight.
And the vote to pass this law, it was held in an atmosphere of pure intimidation.
The Nazis made sure it passed. They blocked opposition members from even getting into the building to vote. They surrounded the hall with armed SA men, chanting threats.
So facing this intense pressure, most of the politicians left either voted yes out of fear or because they genuinely thought it was necessary to restore stability.
And that single vote, it's often called the suicide note of German democracy. The democratic foundations were just annihilated.
And once he had that power, the elimination of all his rivals was swift and systematic. This process was called Gleichschaltung.
Coordination. It meant every single independent part of German society had to be brought in line with Nazi ideology. First, they banned all trade unions and arrested their leaders.
Then they went after the other political parties.
The Social Democrats, the Center Party, all of them, forced to dissolve or just outright banned.
And by July 1933, they passed a law making the Nazi Party the only legal political party in Germany. Trying to form a new one was now a crime.
They took control of everything: local governments, courts, the media, schools.
It was total, and this is when the first concentration camps were opened, right? Specifically for political prisoners.
Exactly. For enemies of the state targeted during this takeover. The very final step to absolute authority came in August 1934. President Hindenburg dies.
And Hitler immediately merges the two top jobs, chancellor and president, into one. He takes the new title of Führer, the leader.
And to seal it, every single soldier in the army was required to swear a new personal oath of loyalty. Not to the Constitution, not to Germany, but directly to Adolf Hitler.
And that was it. The transition from a struggling democracy to a total dictatorship was complete.
What you see in this really short 5-year period is a chilling case study. The failure wasn't just about one strong man. It was this catastrophic combination of economic desperation, national humiliation, and the fatal weaknesses of the political system.
And critically, it shows that legal and political maneuvers, like the Enabling Act, can dismantle freedom much faster than violence alone. It's a powerful lesson in how quickly protections can be removed when fear takes over.
It's fascinating and terrifying to realize that the most catastrophic change in German history was, in the end, signed into law. Legally.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Good luck with your studies.